Hello, happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Human-Centered Leading, conversations where leaders are human, where we explore workplace topics that are relevant in today's workplace. And many times they've been relevant for a long time, and we're just finally getting around to the conversation. I'm really, really excited about today's conversation with two women that I really respect and admire, and who've both taught me and helped me learn and broaden my perspectives about how we support those in the disabled community, which I'm also part of. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. Before we dive in, I just want to make sure I share, as always, just a few highlights and updates and things to know. So, of course, we're at Human-Centered Leading. Hummingbird Humanity, we want this community to really grow and thrive together. So if you're with us, following and watching on LinkedIn or Facebook, please share your, share in the comment section, your link to so others in the can connect with you, and you can share and learn from each other as well. We want to continue to grow our community, and certainly invite your colleagues and friends who you think might be interested in joining us as well. I want to just encourage you, of course, to follow us if you're not already on our social media. So we have our Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn channels for both Brian McCormick and for Hummingbird Humanity. One of my favorite series that we offer on, particularly on our Instagram channels, but you might see this on all of the channels at different points, is Bosco's Biscuit. Bosco is my rescue beagle who was a medical research dog, and Bosco has joined us in the mission to make the world a little bit better for everyone. So follow us, and you can learn from Bosco and some of his tips on being an inclusive human. One of the things that we also like to remember is, our mission at Hummingbird is to amplify the voices of the unheard. And these culture holidays or heritage days and weeks and months are one of the ways that we can celebrate and honor those people in our lives, in our workplaces, who are from different backgrounds and experiences, and honoring these moments in their lives is one of the ways that they can feel seen and heard. And as we learn from each other about why these events are important to us is another way that we can amplify their voices. So definitely keep these on your radar, and honor and celebrate those in your community who are celebrating these events. I'm thrilled, and it's a bit surreal to say that Hummingbird Humanity is now officially 3 years old. We launched in May of 2020 at the height of the pandemic, and it's been quite the journey since kicking off that first conversation called Hope, Heart, and Human Spirit with Eduardo Placer, the founder of Fearless Communicators. Definitely check out Fearless Communicators if you're not familiar with that amazing organization. We've done a lot since then, and we will continue to be committed to making the world a better place, to creating human-centered workplace cultures where humans thrive, and to helping organizations in their commitment to create diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments. And to celebrate our 3-year anniversaries, I don't know what that was, our 3-year anniversary, we are giving away 3 tickets to one of our upcoming DEI Foundations workshops. DEI Foundations is part of our 3-part signature workshop series that includes DEI Foundations, Who Am I, and Navigating Sensitive Conversations. The DEI workshop, or DEI Foundations workshop, is either really good for if you're starting your journey in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you just want to get some foundational sort of frameworks and understanding of the definitions and the language and some of the key things that we think about, and sort of setting the stage for creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. This workshop is great for you. And if you're looking for a refresher, you just want to sort of go back to the basics, that's another group of people that I would say would really enjoy this workshop. And certainly our facilitators, this workshop is led by Andrea Forst, our Chief Consulting Officer, and Ben Green, one of our consultants, and they're both fantastic as well. So definitely follow us on Instagram, like our most recent post, and maybe you can join us for our next workshop. Without further ado, I would love to introduce and welcome our 2 experts that are joining us today to share about their experiences as members of the disabled community, and certainly as experts who are helping workplaces and companies create more accessible and inclusive spaces for everyone. So first, there is Catarina Rivera, who's a public speaker, DEI consultant, and content creator. So Catarina, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. I'll invite you and Alycia to share in just a moment. And then we have Alycia Anderson. Alycia is a motivational speaker, writer, and inclusion coach. So delighted to have you both with me today. And as you all know, I skipped the bios because I think that's time that I'm talking that you're not talking. So I'm going to be quiet here in a minute, and I'm going to invite you each to share a little bit about yourselves. And for those of you who might be new to Hummingbird Humanity, one of the things that we find really important is that we ask, when we do our introductions, we share both who we are and what we do rather than just what we do. So I'm going to invite Alycia and Catarina to do the same. So I'm going to be quiet, and Alycia, I'm going to start with you. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me back, Brian. I love it when we get an opportunity to work together. And to say that I'm not completely pumped to be partnering with Catarina today would be a total lie. I'm a fan. So I'm excited to be here. I am an international TEDx speaker. I'm an inclusion champion. I'm a disability advocate. I founded my company a couple years ago, officially, been side hustling this for several years. I'm launching a podcast in June called Pushing Forward with Alycia. My degrees are in adapted physical activity. I've got a master's degree studying the principles and practices of inclusion. And I am a wheelchair user. So I identify as disabled. I was born with my disability and have lived all of my life from that perspective. And my goal is to help companies globally understand the benefits inherent to building a diverse, inclusive, accessible workplace, to open minds to opportunities, and really kind of teach companies how to advocate and create spaces and become better allies for this topic of disability inclusion in the workplace specifically. And my hope is it's pretty simple. It's to create opportunities for people with disabilities, visible and invisible, to have opportunities to chase their dreams, reach their goals, make the money they want, have the positions they want, and really be bold and go after whatever it is that they dream. So that's what I do.
Awesome. Alycia, it's so good to have you here. And I know, as you said, it's great to spend be on the stage, as it were, with you again and share. Alycia and I have done a few conversations together, and we attack this from different perspectives. I tend to still live as much as I challenge the fact that I've lived in corporate America for the last 25 years, I'm still it's still part of me. And Alicia's like, Brian, we're going to be real. We're just going to be super real right now, and we're going to say it like it is. So it's a good balance, and I'm so glad to have you here. Catarina, would you share a little bit about?
For sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Catarina Rivera. I'm a disabled public speaker, DEI consultant, and content creator. I'll do a quick visual description of myself. I'm a light-skinned Latina woman with dark brown hair, worn in a bun today. I have on silver hoop earrings and glasses with a dark brown frame. I'm wearing an orange short sleeve kind of sweater top. And behind me is a living room with a brick wall and a painting of a elegant woman that many people comment on to all my meetings. So in terms of a little bit more about who I am Cuban and Puerto Rican. I am a disabled Latina woman. My disability is that I have Usher syndrome. It is a combination of a hearing disability and a progressive vision disability, where the visual field narrows over time. I use a white cane now to navigate, which has really changed my life. I'll be talking about that a little bit later. From a personal perspective, I love salsa dancing. I travel most of the year, and I love green tea, especially Japanese tea, and reading. My platform, Blindish Latina, started in 2020 on Instagram, and it became a business in 2021. My community is called the Stigma Smasher community because I want to create an active community that is building a more inclusive and accessible world for everyone, where all of us can be part of making that happen, whether you're disabled or non-disabled. In terms of my professional background, I have an undergraduate degree from Duke University. I have a master's in education, a master's in public health, and I'm a certified professional in accessibility core competencies as well. My career started in education, then I worked in public health and nonprofits for a long time. And now I've shifted to entrepreneurship in the disability awareness, inclusion, accessibility space. I work with companies, I offer speaking, consulting, and I do also brand partnerships as well as a creator. I'm very passionate about this work and I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catarina. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm going to introduce myself, but then I have one follow-up question for each of you from your intros, which I'll come back to. I want to ask Catarina, I want to ask you about when you did the visual description, if you could share more about that. So I'll come back to you about that. And then Alycia, I want to ask you about the term wheelchair user and sort of like the inclusive language. I want to make sure I introduce myself in the spirit of joining in the conversation and also acknowledging that I am also a member of the disabled community. Again, I hopefully I said this already. I'm Brian McCormick. I may have missed that part of the script. Brian McCormick, he, him pronouns. I'm the CEO and founder of Hummingbird Humanity. I am just privileged and honored that I get to be in these spaces with amazing humans like Catarina and Alycia. I have spent a career in human resources, always in the spirit of what I now call creating workplaces where humans thrive, and that's what Hummingbird Humanity does as part of our work as a consulting firm. And we have a speakers bureau where we help to amplify voices and create opportunities where to bring in speakers that share their stories and help workplaces learn more about other lived experiences of others. On the personal side, though, I am an openly gay man. And as I mentioned, I'm disabled, so I have 3 invisible disability identities. One of those that I'll mention right now is that I'm HIV positive. I've been HIV positive for 15 years. And at the time when I found out I was positive, it was quite the shock. And I know that it still can be shocking for others. So I want to just acknowledge that if it's some news that you've just heard and you're not sure how to process it, certainly feel free to send me a note. I'm happy to help you through that if you have any questions. Thing to know is HIV is now a chronic manageable illness, and I take 1 pill a day, and it's just really as simple as that. And not to minimize the importance of safe sex, which is a different conversation altogether, but just wanted to acknowledge that for anyone who is hearing that news and not sure how to process it. But being HIV positive is a big part of my life, and it's been something I share so others know that it's okay to have those, similar to what Catarina was saying of how do we break the stigma? One of the ways to do it is by sharing our stories. So being visible about that part of my life today. But today is really all about the 2 experts that are with us. And so I want to go back to those follow-up questions. Catarina, you shared, as you were introducing yourself, you shared a visual description. Would you share a little bit more about why that's important and how we think about that in today's work world, and particularly from an accessibility perspective?
I'm really glad you asked that. I love the opportunity to expand on it a bit more. First of all, a visual description like the one I gave is not universally loved by blind people. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people feel it's unnecessary. The reason that I do it is because if we do offer descriptions, then we're offering information and people can benefit from it if they like it. And if they don't like it, they can ignore it. But if we don't do it, then we take away information that some people could want. The other thing that's important to note is that I described my skin tone. I said that I was light skinned, and that is very important because that's information that people who can see me can observe, and that informs their understanding of what I share, my stories. They understand that I have certain privilege in this world based on my skin color. So we do need to include race in visual descriptions. That's very important. And there are advocates that have shared videos and can express that even better than I'm sharing with you right now. But that's another reason that I like doing them, because then blind people have access to the same information that other people would have at an event when they look at speakers and can see diversity represented in that way.
Thanks, Catarina. Yeah, and something we'll talk about later as we go through this conversation is all of the different, and we won't cover every example of that, but just the concepts of accessibility and how many different pathways there are to demonstrate your commitment to those who are disabled, and how we can make workplaces more accessible. So more to come on that. Alycia, you mentioned you use the term that you're a wheelchair user, and I know something that we talk a lot about at Hummingbird and in our workshops, and we're actually getting ready to this week release our new inclusive language guide 2.0. So I'm excited about that. Part of what we talk about is how do we, the language is ever evolving and changing, and we're all trying to learn and try to find ways. I believe everyone wants to be part of this. We have that moment of hyper positivity. But I know that some of us times we get the language wrong, and so I would love to hear more about that and what you might share about not only the term wheelchair user, but just the concept of inclusive language for the disabled.
I mean, language is one of the hottest topics in this whole DEI and accessibility conversation, right? Like, it's ever evolving. And in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion that are in this field or advocating, it's one of the greatest barriers of progression to move the conversation forward, because we're so afraid to say the wrong word or offend someone. And that's extremely likely. I mean, we're going to make mistakes. There's just so much navigation of language and learning from somebody else's perspective that we don't know. And so my job as an advocate is to open up the conversation and educate and normalize and try to use the right words. I definitely make mistakes still. I'm a work in progress and learning every day myself. But giving my perspective hopefully is going to push forward the understanding of the power of language and what microaggressions might be versus euphemisms, and what's an empowering term to use, or an oppressive term. And wheelchair user opposed to bound to your wheelchair or something like that has different connotations of a wheelchair being a tool that gives me freedom to navigate life, instead of it being something that I'm bound to and defines me. And so there's different words that you can use that are empowering versus oppressive. And we learn that as we study this and are exposed to these types of things. And what I have learned in my process is, I try to lead with empathy and understand that we're not always going to get it right. And if we get it wrong, we need to apologize, ask how you could do better the next time, and then make that active action to try to do better next time. And maybe one extra step or push forward would be to bring that into your own communities as an ally to share. So the message is learned and shared further on. So yeah.
There's so many good tidbits in there. One thing that I try to champion is something we call Hummingbird human-centered leadership, which of course is the spirit of this conversation about human-centered leading. And one of those paradigms that I talk about and is part of the message is that we are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. How do we make mistakes and create space for us to learn from each other through grace and empathy and understanding, rather than what we know sometimes happens is the shame and the blame and the I don't want to dismiss those moments of emotion when something doesn't feel good, and that happens, and sometimes that's where things emerge. But if we can acknowledge that hurt in those moments, and then also find ways to have pathways to learning, I think it can be really helpful. And in the spirit of that, I'll share, being a human who is learning, I'll share that when the three of us, Alycia and Catarina and I, were having our conversation, I realized there was a moment where I should ask about accommodations if there's anything that we need to do. And I fumbled my way through that question in the moment in time, because I'm like, I don't want to get it wrong. So even I work in this space, and even I have moments where I'm worried about getting it wrong. And of course, Catarina and Alycia are like, Brian, it's fine. Ask about the accommodations and we're going to be okay. I think it's also okay to acknowledge that we might, when we have moments of being nervous and when we're fumbling through something, and I just acknowledged it, said it out loud. And what we have since done is we've updated our process at Hummingbird for our speakers intake form to make sure we ask about accommodations up front, so we can use that as a learning moment and adjust. And that's also, I think, what any of us would say is like, in those moments, we take a moment to acknowledge where we are, we take a moment to learn, and we adjust if there's something to adjust. So I love that. And I wanted to share that just in the moment, in the spirit of being a human-centered leader who's always learning. So the next thing I want to talk about is, and for those of you who are with us for the first time, I like to think about these conversations in chapters. So we start with the about you, and then we'll talk about the why Alycia and Catarina have chosen this career. We'll talk about the topic itself. We'll frame and define the topic. Then we'll talk about how that work transpires for our two experts, and then some of the recommendations that they have for us and challenges they have for us. And then finally, we'll just invite a moment of just humanity and wrap up with what's bringing us each joy today. So I want to start with next what's your why? And Catarina, I'm going to start with you this time. What are the aspects, the milestones, the moments of this work, or what guides you to be this person who is working with organizations and using your story and your expertise to make change happen?
My why comes from my own personal journey with disability. When I knew about my hearing disability, I was really young. It was easy for me as a child to adapt because I didn't know any other way. I wore hearing aids, I went to school, that was my life. When I was 17 and I found out about my progressive vision disability, that was another experience altogether. I was very surprised. I was not expecting it. And I also didn't know what was going to happen because there wasn't a lot of information given. There wasn't a lot of support given. And this is very common for people who find out about their disabilities through the medical system. The medical system is only focused on treating, curing, eliminating your disability. They do not talk to you about living well, about resources and finding support and connection, and this idea of living with a disability. So I didn't have a lot of guidance. And I know what my journey was. My journey took a long time. When I was in college, I didn't want to talk about my disability. I was in denial. I had a lot of shame. I was very much trying to appear fully sighted, even at parties where it was dark and loud and so hard for me to navigate. After a period of years, after moving to New York, and I stopped driving before I officially would have to stop driving, I made that choice earlier, I started to progress. I met other blind people, I got services, I started to understand that I could have a great career and a great life, and all I needed to do was adapt. But I didn't have that vision before. After another group of years and growth, I decided to start using a white cane. A lot of blind people that could benefit from using a white cane don't want to. And I understand why, because there's a lot of stigma around it, especially when you do have some sight remaining. Only 15% of blind people are totally blind. So lots of blind people out there have some remaining sight that they're using. And unfortunately, the general public doesn't generally understand that. And there is this rhetoric of accusing blind people of faking their blindness. So blind people have gotten harassed online and in person when they're using a cane in a way that doesn't make sense to observers around them, which is very, very disheartening. So I decided I'm going to use a cane. That changed my life. I became okay with people staring at me, having questions about me, and I decided I'm going to do this in the way that works for me. I'm not going to care what other people are thinking or questioning. That took me to the next level in terms of my disability identity, my confidence in myself, and my voice as a self advocate. The cane opened up the conversation, and I started asking for everything I needed. That improved my life, having a strong voice and asking and communicating about my disability in everyday situations. All of this, kind of this whole journey, is what led to me deciding to share my story publicly and then start a business, because I knew how long it took me to get to a place where I was proud of my identity, where I could talk about the fact that I was blind and it wasn't a tragedy in my mind. It's not a tragedy, but I used to feel that way. I wanted to help other people. I wanted to use my energy, my capacity to change our world. And that is something that I felt called to do. I wanted to be that representation I didn't have. I didn't see thriving disabled Latina women online and like in my world when I was diagnosed. So I'm here, I'm doing it, and it's really important to me to keep showing up, not only for the community online, but doing constructive work within companies and organizations, because I know how difficult it can be to navigate the workplace and how just stressful it can be trying to get a job and not knowing if you're going to be discriminated against or not knowing what you want to share or not share. So I always think about the disabled people in the companies that have not just closed. I think about them. I think about people who are earlier on their disability journey who are still struggling. And that's who I keep in mind with my work.
I really connect with that. Like, I did not see this in my future, that this would be my tagline on LinkedIn. And I think about the day that I found out I was positive, for example, and I would have never thought I would share that in any public forum ever. And now I share it, and occasionally I still have moments of feeling nervous about it, but but that's, when I get that comes from the world around me and not from me. I'm okay. And I've used that as inspiration for what I get to do today. And so I love that. I hear that in your story as well, that it's rather than seeing it as like, this is a challenge in my life, it's an opportunity to inspire and make a difference. So thank you. Alycia, what about you? What are the milestones and moments in this work? What's your why?
Oh gosh, it's been such a lifelong thing, just like Catarina. When I was born, I was born with an identical twin sister who's able-bodied. This whole mission to inclusion, finding a path forward, has been embedded in me to just keep up with my twin sister and vice versa when we were little. My parents didn't know they were going to have a kid with a disability, so they didn't know what to do other than adapt what was essential. And then when I was born in the mid 70s. ADA wasn't around. A lot of the legislation was just being shipped and advocated for. And so they knew I was going to have an uphill battle of advocacy and finding a spot, a place for myself in school and work, in life. And so they pushed me to Catarina's key word, find ways to adapt on the fly sometimes, to find a place in life where I would have a path forward. And so this whole theory of inclusion was embedded in my life before it was a thing that we're advocating loudly for. And then my mom passed away when I was really young. And before she died, she told my dad she better be independent. And he took that very seriously. And started working when I was 14, and I never stopped. I always chose the physical jobs. My twin sister's a waitress. I'm going to be a waitress. I was the first waitress in a wheelchair ever. 15 margaritas on my lap, spin around, took an open-minded, forward-thinking company in the 90s. And it took my willingness to try and communicate and work together to be successful. And that translated all the way through my career. I ended up working in corporate America for like 20 years, made it all the way to vice president of sales at a software company where I was a woman leading with a disability that could get the job done. And I was always hired for jobs that were not the thing that you would hire the girl in the wheelchair for. And so I felt there was a real need for representation. I could count on one hand how many people that I saw that look like me. And to Catarina's point, there's a ton of people that have invisible disabilities and physical disabilities that are not identifying because of ableism and stigmas in the workplace, and they're afraid they're going to be discriminated against. And if they ask for accommodations, there's so much stigma and just negative connotations to that stuff in our society that's very normalized. We're trying to shift those perspectives, but so I just 3 people that look like me out of my entire career, a woman with a visible disability that is slaying her career. And so I had opportunities to start to speak. And every time I would go to a job interview, I would hide my disability on LinkedIn. I would hide my disability to hiring managers before I would go, because I was so afraid that I wouldn't get my first wheel in the door to even have the conversation. I trained myself, wish away my disability, tell them how I can do the job, make everybody else feel cozy, comfy. Oh no, I don't need adaptations. I was such an ableist, internalizing it. I don't want to be disabled. I'm just like my sister. Don't worry about it. I got it. I got it. I got it. And what I was doing was making things really difficult for myself. And over time, as I grew into a stronger woman who started to really accept the layers of my identity, disability being one of them, not all of them, but a huge component of who I am, I started to share. And as I started to share, I would see like light bulbs are starting to go off and conversations are opening and people are starting to raise their hand and they're laughing and they're crying and they're sharing and they're trying to navigate something that we are so trained in our society to think is bad. It needs to be fixed. We need to heal it to be whole. And it's just not the case, at least in my perspective. I can't speak for everybody else, but so, I had all these I've been advocating for myself to have the career I want, make the money I want, get in leadership roles, be on boardroom, like all these things that you don't see people with disabilities represented. And there was just an opportunity to start to speak. So I started speaking and it was like, wow, I'm pretty good at this. And then I got a TEDx talk and like advanced my business. And then I had a boss that hired me that I didn't have to hide my disability. It's the first time ever. He hired me because of my expertise and my education and all these things, but he also hired me because he knew I had to be a good planner, that I have to plan and pre-plan and plan some more for accessibility. I was in sales, so planes, airports, Ubers in a wheelchair are, in my experience, I have Uber anxiety. Like, I'm left behind a lot. People drive by me, like we are treated like second-class citizens a lot, and we're not seen for who we are and all of the talents that we bring because we're looking at the cane, the wheelchair, the this, whatever, And so my boss hired me and he said, I know you have to be a good planner, a proficient planner. And I know that's going to translate to your work. And he not only saw beyond my disability, but he knew that it was a quality that made me qualified over other people. And when I had that experience, we're shifting perspectives in the workplace. And so now I'm going into corporations and I'm like, hey, like, are you like, what's your difference? What's your diversity? Leverage it as an asset. Let's not hide it. Like, how do we strategically put it into play so you are more strategically valued and can leverage your career and climb the ladder and do all these things? So for me, it was organic. I wanted to grow my career and not be labeled in any box and just go for it. And so here I am. And that's what I do. But that was really my path.
I love it. I love it. I love it. One who's watching with us right now, just to take a moment to close your eyes and to picture a vice president of a sales organization. My guess is that even now, that vice president of sales you picture is still a white man who's probably about 6 feet tall, who's probably fairly handsome, who's probably in his mid-30s. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's generally the profile that we're going to see. And of course, we just heard, Alycia, that you held that role. And this is an opportunity. This is one of those moments of like where representation matters. So like you sharing your story and people knowing that you got there. And you can, that it's true for anyone else. It's possible as well. I both struggle with if you can see it, you can be it as well. Because I'm like, because someone has to get there first, and I don't want, and so that one I struggle with. So, but I also get that representation matters. I think you were going to say something.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's like one of my worst traits, but thank you for saying that. I'm very proud of that. And what I am most proud of is when I got into a role that I was leading, there was so many people from the organization that like were inspired by seeing somebody that is different go for it, and it drove them to ask for the promotion or ask for the raise, not be afraid to use your voice in no matter what your situation is, disability or not. And so I'm so proud of that in my career, because that is the power in it. That's the power of letting other people see through your lens of, oh, I believe impossible too. Like, it's literally just that, for me. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, the last thing that I'll share in this section of like our whys, and certainly I have my why as well. I thought I would just share an example of one of these moments of where what it can feel like, and and I think Alycia and Catarina have both done this well, of when someone wants to minimize or erase your identity. I was asked to be part of a video once that was celebrating diversity, equity, and inclusion at this company. And we were asked to each share identities in this video. And so I recorded 3 different clips. I'm a volleyball player, I am gay, and I'm HIV positive. And one of the things that we try to do at Hummingbird is help people realize that there's lots of different diversity experiences, and we can bring all of us with us to work, and we do anyway, whether the company accepts it or not. And I told the producer, the DEI person at the company, I said, if you want to use the HIV message, if it works for the video, don't put it in there just because, but if it works for the video, please include it. Don't not include it because it makes you nervous. And she did. And senior executives saw it and said, we can't have that in the video. And so they cut it out. And like the moment of someone erasing my story and saying it's not comfortable for others is still painful today. Well, it is ableism. Yes, it is ableism. And it's painful today, and it's still hard. And I also realized, though, there's something that was inherent. I shared that in that there's also the choice that I get to have is with my invisible disabilities, that I get to choose when and where to share my story. And that's not true. Like Alycia, when you're talking about like all of the effort you would go through to hide and the fact that you're a wheelchair user, and like that, the energy that it takes, and it's exhausting either way. But I have a choice in that as well, which has its own privilege to some degree. So it's an interesting conversation for us to continue having. So as we move to this next area of the conversation, something I wanted to highlight for those of you who are with us, we spend a lot of time on our stories and this part of the journey with our experts, because I believe that these are the ways that we really change hearts and minds, by having these stories, by sharing our journeys, by sharing our experiences. We're going to share some of our expertise now, and of course, all of our stories are still embedded with our expertise, but our humanity is what we lead with, and then the expertise is what we borrow to then help with creating the systems and structures that are more inclusive for everyone. So let's move into a little bit of that. So I'm going to ask Catarina to help us start this part off with how do we define and think about accessibility? Can you bring that to life for us a little bit?
Accessibility is, I think accessibility is love. Accessibility means that everybody is valuable, and we want everyone to be able to both access and participate and contribute to a space or a community, a company, an organization, an event, whatever it is that we're focusing on. So I think when we think about ableism, for example, ableism is telling us that non-disabled people are more valuable or worthy than disabled people. So if disabled people are left out, it doesn't really matter. And what accessibility says is it matters, and we want everyone there. We want everyone able to receive everything and participate equally. When it comes to digital accessibility, we're talking about making everything understandable and easy to understand and navigate. So a website, the 2 most important ways of navigating a website to make sure it's accessible, you want to make sure someone can navigate using only a keyboard or using only a screen reader. And I recently was on a trip that I co-led in Portugal with 8 disabled travelers, and a bunch of them were blind, and they were talking about the amount of time it takes them to do stuff on the internet because things are not properly labeled. Buttons don't have labels. Sometimes they don't know what it does, or a website's not organized. They can't jump ahead. And you're not seeing someone in the room on their computer having this struggle. It is just as important to focus on digital accessibility as it is physical accessibility of a space. I think people can visually understand, oh, if someone can't get into a space, that's awful. But it's also awful if someone can't access an application for a job or an event they want to attend. They can't even read the information. And so all of that is really important when it comes to accessibility.
I think it's such a good point of the it's an empathy conversation partly of how do you put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand their experience, and then the next part of that is when they tell you their experience, you need to believe them. And to your point, I had not thought about that visual, Catarina, of I've had conversations with Hummingbird about the accessibility of our website, and I'm not sure if we've covered all the things that you just highlighted, so we'll have that conversation later. But I know we've talked about it, but I didn't sort of take that additional step of like, okay, well, what does it mean for that person, that human who is at home, who wants to access our content? What does that look like? So thank you for bringing that to life for us. Alycia, how would you define accessibility? What's important, do you think, for us to understand?
I define it as freedom. I define it as independence. I define it as everything. I mean, there's no such thing of inclusion for people with any type of disability if we're not creating the equitable accessibility for them. And that's going to look different in every situation because we're all different and there's so many variations of it. So structurally, like obviously that means ramps and wider doors and elevators, and those are all things that make environments accessible, but it's so much more than that. It's a state of mind. It enables true equity. Like it gives us the tools that each of us need to reach the finish line together. It allows us, from a technology standpoint, to Catarina's point, if we're going to open businesses online, which I mean, the majority of everything is online. If we were to open a brick and mortar business, we would be required to look at ADA and make accessibility standards accessible. What is the difference? I mean, we're opening businesses online and we can't pick and choose who we allow into our business. And so it's a philosophy that drives inclusion, and it allows people to work. It allows people to communicate. It allows us to access the services and get the support in our lives that we need. And the reality is it comes in so many variations, and so does disability. And we have to be open to navigating that. It's a work in progress that has to always have a magnifying glass on it and initiatives focused on it. And when we start to understand that, it benefits our businesses. Like there's so much value in shifting perspective on accessibility as an afterthought that we have to deal with because of punitive issues. It's actually an opportunity to innovate and have more customer base. And there's so much to it. But most of all, like it's a freedom for all of us as we age, as we change and grow over time and start to utilize so we can move forward in our lives, access our lives, go to work, make a, salary, have a career. So it's freedom for me. If there was no such thing as accessibility, I would be at home. Like I would be stuck at home for sure. So it's a powerful conversation.
And I feel like you're the first person I heard say this, Alycia, and if not, I'm just gonna go with that you were, was that when we think about like through the ableist lens, and actually for those of you who are watching and with us, Alycia shared a post a few days ago that had this very detailed description of the concept of ableism and how we need to think about it. So we'll share that in the Facebook and LinkedIn channel. So for those of you who are looking for a little bit more on that understanding that lens on this conversation, I think that's a great resource. And one of the things that we think about though is that ableism, or like ableist realities, that the things that make the world accessible to us just are what they are. They're not accessible, or accommodation types of things. Stairs, are an accommodation or to make buildings accessible that we think from an ableist perspective, like we deserve that, but not the things that Alycia needs as a wheelchair user. And the reality is we all need something to accept different pathways to access buildings or websites or whatever it may be. And so how do we expand that definition of lens, I think, is part of this conversation, rather than just start from just one lens. Did you say that to me, you think? Do you remember that?
I mean, it sounds familiar, probably. We've had so many of these conversations. I think it's just important to realize that accessibility, like creating space for accessibility in a business, it drives an opportunity to access a business and services in an intuitive way, whether you've got a disability or not. So if you really bake these philosophies into your business and drive accessibility practices and philosophies, you're creating products and services and technologies that we're all choosing universally. There's just a win-win. And all, think about the tools that you're using today: Siri and texting and closed caption and larger bathrooms, and we all want these things because we're thinking on a broader perspective of how do we make something work for everyone. And when you think like that, it's intuitive. Like it's the easiest way to use it. So it's shifting perspectives in the conversation. And once you start to have these moments of like, oh yeah, I do use an electric toothbrush and I don't have it, whatever, like there's a lot of value in it.
Yeah. Jade, who's behind the scenes, is going to bring up a visual for us real quick that I wanted to just highlight, which I think is inherent in what Catarina and Alycia have already shared. Of there's when we think about accessibility, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me are things like wheelchair ramps. So it's more specifically for people that are wheelchair users and that part of the accessibility conversation. And there are so many different lenses on accessibility. This visual is from Jamie Shields. So we'll share the link in the chat. Jamie shares lots of great tools and resources like this one on accessibility and on just the disabled community conversations around how we create accessible and inclusive workplaces for the disabled community. So just wanted to sort of give a visual, because I know some people are visual learners and that might be helpful for you to see some of the lenses that we're describing. And just to continue that, Catarina, I wanted to ask you about is this accessibility conversation similar or different for those with visible and invisible identities? I know we've talked a little bit about that, and maybe just sort of take that and lead into it. Like, maybe that leads us into are there anything that you think would, messages you say that people might be surprised to hear about our community?
Okay, let's start with what you asked about the differences. And I use different terminology for this. I use apparent and non-apparent disability. When you have a non-apparent disability, what's interesting about this too is the idea that there are always signs of disability, but they aren't always interpreted as signs of someone's disability. So someone with, I'm trying to think, like someone with auditory processing disorder might have a challenge understanding something. And that might not be interpreted as, oh, that's related to disability, if someone doesn't understand that that person has a disability. Same with chronic illness or mental health conditions. So I think that's really important to recognize that this kind of terminology, I'm still contending with it because it's really through the non-disabled person's lens. Do they understand that person has a disability? And so what happens, I think, in accessibility is often there's an emphasis on physical disabilities because that's what people can recognize. They see more distinguishable signs and understandable signs to them if they're non-disabled. So oftentimes that's what's focused on. Or even things like someone being deaf or hard of hearing, people kind of know, okay, ramps, ASL, captioning. Doesn't mean they're always provided, but there's more awareness of those strategies for accessibility. And I think there's less awareness of how to be inclusive for other disabilities. So that's why I share a lot in my content about things that really come from my background as an educator that are about facilitation. For example, I shared on LinkedIn recently, if you are facilitating a workshop and you ask a question or you issue a reflection prompt, give quiet time. Stop talking. for people to be able to process that and reflect, and maybe like a few minutes, let them know the time period you're giving them, then initiate the sharing. Because if you ask a question and you go right into the sharing, you're only going to get the people that have processed that quickly, who have more privilege in that space, and who that's more accessible for. You're not going to be able to bring everyone in an inclusive way. So I share things like that that maybe are just not as well understood about disability. So I think when the difference that I see is that there's just more of a lack of knowledge about best practices for accessibility, for mental health conditions, cognitive disabilities, chronic illness. It's like that people just don't have as much information on. But the good thing is that a lot of accessible best practices work for different groups of disabilities at once. And I love sharing the example of closed captions, not just for the deaf and hard of hearing, and benefits English language learners. People who are autistic with ADHD, auditory processing disorder, can often benefit from captions. Also, people who are tired. People just like captions now. It provides information in more than one way. So you're reaching a broader group. So it's kind of like that. So even though I just heard you say, Brian, a ramp is for a wheelchair user, I use ramps too, because I feel safer. I'm navigating with my cane. It's much more stressful going downstairs and having to interpret that information. So a ramp works for me, and I know there are other disabled people that a ramp works for as well. So that's the beauty of accessibility. And now for your other question about what might be surprising about the disability community, I have two or just a few things. When we talk about the statistics, 1 in 4 adults in the US reports having a disability. That comes from 2018. So the actual number is higher. That's also a self-report. People have to say, yes, I have a disability. Not everyone is going to answer that. So we are a huge group of people, and we're even larger than the numbers say. The second thing I think would surprise people is in the workplace, only 21% of disabled people disclose to HR. Only 21%. So if whatever number you have in your demographic data, let's multiply that by 5 in terms of the disabled people you have in your company. I think that would surprise a lot of managers and leaders.
Both good stats. And actually I can echo that for, we do employee experience survey work and we do assessments for equitable and inclusive environments. And one of the, we collect demographic information, and every time I see those disability stats, I'm like, that is a fraction. And it's helpful to have the multiple of 5 perspective though, because that I don't think we use that detail. We just always say that we know that this is underreported and you have more than this. So thank you for sharing that, and we'll borrow that guidance from you going forward. And I also just wanted to go back to the conversation about how accessible solutions can make a difference for a variety of other humans. So the one I love to use is the sidewalks, the ramp that makes the sidewalk accessible for wheelchair users. It makes a difference for lots of other humans. Catarina's mentioned some of those examples, and also for parents with a stroller. Like, just it makes their life easier. And that wasn't what they were made for initially, but it makes a difference for lots of humans. So it's good stuff. Okay, I want to, and actually I was going to mention Jade, who is behind the scenes. She mentioned that she has an autistic child, and she was talking about the apparent and non-apparent disability, and how she's had to learn to navigate certain moments, questions and reactions to her child, and how she communicates. So, and I think this is also, as you both are sharing, it makes a difference for those of us as we interact with people that are different than us, and starting to understand their stories and their experiences through different lenses. As we think about that, Alycia, I'm curious what you would, when you look at the work that you do and the challenges that you might offer. And actually, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to say, for everyone who's with us, we're probably going to go just a few minutes over. We're not going to go way over because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but we're going to finish some key messages before we wrap up. So if you miss the end of the conversation, you have to drop off. There'll be a video, and we'll share it later, so you can always come back and finish, with the final words of wisdom from our 2 guests. Alycia, what I want to ask you about is, what are the biggest challenges in accessibility for companies? When we're talking about all these different lenses of, we're talking about buildings, we're talking about physical, this physical spaces. We're talking about the electronic tools. We're talking about how people working from home in the hybrid work environment, and so many other parts of this puzzle. What do you think are the biggest challenges today? What do you challenge the companies you work with to do?
I mean, one of the questions that I get almost every time I speak to a company is they're overwhelmed by all of those layers that you just said. And it's like, where do we start? And the work seems daunting, and there's so much fear behind making mistakes. It's blocking them from taking action, because there is a lot of layers to it. I mean, there just is. And so the answer is you start. Like, you choose initiatives, you get together as a group, you look at your organization, you create policies, and you start chipping away at it, realizing that accessibility is not a one size fits all, that we have to check our biases, check ableism at the door, and lead our efforts. Again, we've been saying it this whole time, with empathy, with intention rather than fear. And it needs this accessibility needs to be baked in as a philosophy. It is not a check off the box thing. It needs to be baked into programs, products, infrastructure, culture, all of it. And realizing that it's, again, this ongoing effort. It's going to always be changing, because we're living, I mean, look how fast the world changes right now. Like, it just is. And so, to support you in that, you need to hire people with disabilities as experts, put them on boards, put them in leadership roles, include disability in your diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. Like, how many of these conversations I'm having all the time with companies that it's not even included in those groups that they're forming in every organization now. And so specific departments dedicated on accessibility initiatives, internally and externally. So there's just a lot to chip away at. And I think it starts at coming together as a group and deciding what is important within your company infrastructure. Where do we start? That's a big question that has to kind of be drawn out internally within your initiatives.
Yeah, and there's so many good things in there. The one that I'm going to double down on is and it reminds me of this conversation I had with the leadership team at a company a handful of years ago. And I'm going to keep it very general because I want to be respectful of the company. And it was this group of men that I was talking to, and they're like, we know we need more women, and we're working on that. So we're starting an internship program that's targeted at women to bring in women who work in this specific space. Like, okay, cool. Which women are in the conversation right now that are helping you solve this puzzle, how you're going to do this? They're like, there aren't any. I'm like, okay, so let's maybe just pause for a second and like let's tackle this from a different perspective. And so many times there are these well-intentioned initiatives that are started but don't include members of the community to say, hey, like, here's what the barrier is, or here's the thing that we need to think about. So always include, and don't do it in the, like, and this is where you invite people like Catarina and Alycia and myself into the room to say, hey, we know we need to do this, but there are ways to do that and ways not to do that will feel respectful and inclusive, and not like if this person is being tokenized. So ask for help if you're not sure how to do it in a way that's going to make that's going to accomplish the goal while also treating the human with the utmost respect. Catarina, I know you're focused. I mean, you mentioned that you're focused on travel. Accessibility is one conversation earlier. An example. And, I'm curious how is looking at a specific industry, what that's been looking like, and what's been emerging in those that research and those conversations.
I work with companies in all industries. I just have a personal interest in increasing my work within the travel industry, the travel conversations. That's one aspect of my larger work. And the reason that I'm so passionate about it is because I love travel. It's a huge part of my life. And I know some disabled people want to travel, but they encounter barriers, very real barriers, whether that's airlines damaging and breaking wheelchairs on a regular basis, whether that's flight attendants not being trained and how to offer assistance to blind passengers. That happens to me all the time. I was entering a flight the other day, and the flight attendant spoke to my partner because she saw my cane and said, "Oh, she's blind. She didn't notify her." yeah, she's blind, or yeah, we need to be notified, blah, blah, blah. And, she's talking about me to the person with me as if I don't have the agency to speak to myself. And there's always a microaggression that happens. You can pretty much count on that. When I hear things like hotels they design rooms that are accessible, but then an actual wheelchair user goes in the room and tries to use the bathroom, take a shower, and it is not designed in an intuitive way. It does not actually work for them. So there's just so many examples. Being deaf and hard of hearing, we cannot understand the announcements on the planes most of the time, or doing group tours is very hard. So, and for me, my disabilities work against each other. I need to be in the back of a group to follow them easily with my cane, but then when they stop, I need to be in the front by the guide in order to read lips. So I'm kind of like trying my best, but it would be much easier if the industry was inclusive and accessible. And so that's just something I'm very passionate about. And I'm looking to increase my impact in that area. I'm speaking at the Women in Travel Summit this month in Puerto Rico. And I'm hoping to have conversations in the future with airlines. We need to see change in this industry. And I'm approaching it really from showcasing myself as a disabled traveler in my content and raising awareness in that way, and looking for opportunities to speak and work with partnerships in that space. So I think that it's really, really important, and there's just so much more to address. Of course, we have people who have the non-apparent disabilities that we were speaking about earlier. My friend who had ADHD shared that there's a sensory room at the Seattle airport, and that was very cool, and she shared on her content. I think there's just a lot of practices that have not been, I guess, brought everywhere, and there are destinations that have inherent barriers like cobblestones or lack of sidewalks, and there's a lot that's going on with travel. So I'm trying to take my little piece of it and keep that conversation expanding and bring disability to the travel conversations that are happening. Bring disability in there.
And if I could throw an attitude barriers within the whole process, like it's absolutely inhumane sometimes. Like I just straight up getting through TSA. So like there is so much work that needs to be done in this. It's unbelievable. So do your work, girl.
I love where Catarina started was just acknowledging that this the work that I think all three of us do is I call it industry agnostic. So it certainly works across industries. I think we each will have our passions, and one of the industries that we get to work with at Hummingbird, which is not our primary business, but we work with Broadway shows, and being part of bringing that magic to life and helping to bring that magic to life in an inclusive, equitable, and diverse way is really amazing for me. And doesn't keep the lights on necessarily, but it's something that we just love that we get to be part of. So I appreciate the intersection of a passion and the work you have. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're at the finish line. I'm going to ask two more questions for each of you. These will be relatively quick. So the first, and I guess the second question is two parts, but it's still really quick. So the first question is, any final challenges or recommendations or things you just want to say about this conversation before we move into the how people reach you and what's bringing you joy? So final words of wisdom, challenges of this conversation. Alycia, you go first.
Be bold. Start the work. Don't shy away from the things that are unfamiliar, but accept them as the greatest challenges, that once we overcome these things, we're filling space for, a lot more opportunity for a lot more people. Educate yourself on these topics, educate yourself on the disability rights movement, educate yourself on diversity initiatives and how disability relates and should be included. Disable ableism in your life. Hire experts, be intentional, and just believe in possible for everyone, that we don't know what somebody else can do unless we are giving opportunities for them to show us. So I think just be open to all of that.
I'm seeing a social media post with a slideshow. Be bold. Hire all of us. Have an expert. Like, we're just going to go one by one. All Alicia's words of wisdom. I love it.
I love it.
Thank you, Alicia. Catarina, what about you? What are your final words for our audience today?
I want everyone to amplify disabled voices and learn from disabled voices. So just like you've learned from us today and spent this time with us, keep learning from other disabled voices, because we're here, we're sharing, they're sharing our knowledge. And even if you yourself are disabled, this is an opportunity to amplify other disabled voices and support diversity, because oftentimes disability is represented by white men. But so I myself focus really consciously on amplifying other voices. For example, Black disabled voices, Asian disabled voices, voices of people who have disabilities that are different than mine, so mental health conditions, neurodivergence, chronic illness, etc. It's so important for me to amplify and learn from the broader community. I hope you do the same.
Yeah, I love that, Catarina. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I would challenge others that look like me and have spaces like the one I have today. There's a reason why there's people who don't look like me on this call, because we want to amplify your voices, Catarina and Alicia, and thank you for saying yes. Because I have the privilege to have channels like this, and others like me do, and so give your space away, give your time away, let others share the spotlight or have the spotlight. So thank you both. So let's wrap up. How do people find you or connect with you, and what's bringing you joy today? Catarina, would you like to start?
Sure. So if you want to hear more from me, start with my TEDx talk. It's only 11 minutes. It's called Creating Inclusive Workplaces for All. Then if you like Instagram, I'm on there as Blindish Latina. That's where you get all of my travel content. On LinkedIn, I'm also very active, and I share a lot of tips and stories on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays when I'm on my schedule. Other than that, you've got my website, you've got my information. And what is bringing me joy? Love this question as a wrap up. I'll share two things. I'm reading a book on disability justice called Care Work. And this is really bringing me joy because I am learning about disability-led spaces and movements that I'm not yet familiar with. And I just want to keep getting exposed to this different voices in my own community. And then from a personal perspective, I am spending time with my parents this week, and I really am grateful for that and enjoying those moments.
Love that. Thank you, Catarina. So, and that book was, we'll make sure we share that link to the book in the space or in the follow-up chat, or the follow-up email blast as well. So, because I lost the title there. And Alicia, how do people find you, and what's bringing you joy?
AliciaAnderson.com, Alicia with a Y. My TEDx talk is on my website as well, Disabling Ableism, the Modern Pathway to Inclusion. My Instagram is at Alicia Speaking, and I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Please connect with me there. I love it. And two things that bring me joy. First of all, this work and making the impact is amazing. I spoke a couple weeks ago for an organization, and at the end of it, a girl with a disability, she had spinal cord injury, raised her hand, and she was really silent, and she said to me, I don't know how to put this into words other than I'm ready to give my disability a voice. And the fact that I can have that type of impact on individuals to help advance their opportunities is why I do this. So that is what brings me joy and keeps me going. And then personally, I love to travel too, and one day I want to be Catarina, traveling all over the world. So anyway,
I want to be. Go ahead.
This brings me joy. Thank you, Brian, and your team for the opportunity of this beautiful conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. And I will echo, I want to be Catarina one day too. So let's all just aspire to be Catarina. And the book that Catarina mentioned is called Care Work. And we'll also be sharing in the follow-up the Catarina's disability reading list. So thank you for sharing that. And see a couple of my favorites on there, like Being Human. So thank you for sharing that. Everyone here probably knows how to find me, so I'm gonna skip that step, and I'll just wrap up with what's bringing me joy today. My sister, who is gay and chose not to share her story publicly for most of her adult life, came out a few years ago and has a wonderful life, and they are And she's now part of like my work in her own way. She sends me content all the time, and she joined an ERG at her company. And so I like to be, I know that I've inspired her, and that's been really beautiful. And the best part of the story is that, and I think about that because it's now a conversation we have in a way that we never did before. And she and her wife are pregnant. My sister is gonna give birth to my nephew, my first nephew, their first grandchild for our parents, sometime in the next couple of weeks. So I'm gonna finally be a gunkle. For those of you who don't know, that's a gay uncle, and I'm looking forward to that. So it's good stuff. Alycia, Catarina, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for going on this a few minutes longer than you signed up for. I really appreciate you spending a few extra minutes with me and with all of us, and sharing your wisdom and your stories and your expertise. I wish you both much success as you continue to challenge workplaces and create workplace cultures where humans thrive. For all of you with us, thank you for being part of the conversation and part of the work. We need everyone to be with us, to make a difference and to make the world a better place for everyone. Until next time, I hope you'll be with us in June for our next human-centered leading conversation. Until then, stay safe and be well. Bye, everyone.